April 1945. Somewhere in the forests of Bavaria, a column of captured Wehrmacht soldiers trudged through mud toward an American processing camp, their faces hollow with defeat. They had survived the Eastern Front. They had endured Allied bombing raids. They had witnessed the collapse of the Third Reich. But nothing in their military training, nothing in their propaganda briefings, nothing in their understanding of modern warfare had prepared them for what they were about to see: American soldiers who seemed to have stepped directly out of the Wild West, men who could shoot with a precision that defied belief, rope enemy positions like cattle, and navigate terrain with an almost supernatural skill. The German High Command had studied American industrial capacity, analyzed their tank divisions, and planned for their air superiority. But they had failed to account for one unexpected element in the American military machine: the Cowboys. What followed was not just a clash of armies, but a collision of worlds, where the frontier spirit of the American West met the rigid discipline of the Wehrmacht, and the results would shatter German assumptions about their enemy. The story begins not in Europe, but in the vast expanses of the American West, where in 1942, Army recruiting stations from Montana to Texas reported an unusual phenomenon. Ranch hands, rodeo riders, and cattle drivers were enlisting in numbers that surprised military planners. These men brought skills that seemed archaic in an age of mechanized warfare: horsemanship, roping, tracking, and an intimate understanding of open terrain. Lieutenant Colonel Raymond Hartwell, commanding officer of the 2nd Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron, mechanical, recognized something others missed. In his September 1942 report to V Corps headquarters, he wrote, "These Western recruits possess navigational abilities and fieldcraft that exceed our standard training programs. They read terrain like city men read street signs." The military establishment initially viewed these skills with skepticism. Modern warfare was about artillery barrages, tank columns, and air support. What use were men who could track deer through mountain passes or rope steers at full gallop? But Hartwell persisted. He began documenting the unique capabilities these men brought to reconnaissance units. Private First Class William Buck Thornton, a Wyoming ranch hand who had spent 20 years working cattle in the Bighorn Mountains, demonstrated abilities that astounded his instructors at Fort Riley. During a navigation exercise in October 1942, Thornton led his squad 15 miles through unmarked Kansas prairie at night, arriving at the objective within minutes of the designated time, using only starlight and terrain features for guidance. Sergeant Dale Weatherby, a former Texas Ranger and rodeo champion, could estimate distances with uncanny accuracy, a skill honed from years of competitive shooting and working with livestock across vast ranches. During marksmanship qualifications, he consistently hit targets at ranges that other soldiers struggled to estimate correctly. The Army's Cavalry School at Fort Riley began developing specialized training programs. According to military records dated November 1942, they created reconnaissance courses that incorporated Western skills with modern military tactics. These programs taught conventional soldiers how to move silently through terrain, use natural features for concealment, and estimate distances without instruments, skills that cowboys had practiced since childhood. By early 1943, entire reconnaissance platoons contained significant numbers of Western recruits. The 2nd and 3rd Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadrons, both mechanical units despite their historical designation, had transformed their operational methods. They combined the mobility of jeeps and armored cars with the fieldcraft of men who had spent their lives reading the land. The statistics were remarkable. Training reports from Fort Riley indicated that Western recruits completed advanced reconnaissance courses in 60% of the standard time. Their land navigation scores exceeded the Army average by 40%. Most significantly, they demonstrated a tactical patience, the ability to observe without acting, that came from years of tracking game and managing livestock. When these units deployed to Europe in late 1943 and early 1944, they carried with them not just military equipment, but a frontier heritage that would soon collide with an enemy who had no concept of the American West except through distorted Hollywood films that the Nazi propaganda ministry had shown as examples of American barbarism. March 15, 1945. The Rhineland Forest Sector, approximately 40 kilometers east of the captured Remagen Bridge. the 2nd Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron had been tasked with probing German defensive positions ahead of the advancing 9th Armored Division. What occurred that morning would become the first documented encounter that would shatter German perceptions. Oberleutnant Friedrich von Steinberg, commanding a Wehrmacht defensive outpost, had positioned his men according to standard doctrine. His unit, veterans of the Eastern Front, had established interlocking fields of fire, prepared fallback positions, and maintained strict noise discipline. They had survived Soviet assaults and British artillery bombardments. They considered themselves professional soldiers facing a wealthy but militarily soft American force. Von Steinberg's war diary, recovered by Allied forces in April 1945, provides a German perspective on what happened next. 0547 hours. Observation post reports movement at 800 meters. But impossible, no engine sounds, no radio traffic, no preparatory bombardment. Our Eastern Front veterans insist something approaches, but sensors detect nothing mechanical. What the Germans couldn't comprehend was that 4 American scouts, all former ranch hands from Montana and Wyoming, had dismounted from their jeeps 2 kilometers back and were advancing through the forest using skills learned tracking elk through similar terrain. Corporal James "Jimmy" Dutton, who had guided hunters through Yellowstone country before the war, led the patrol. The Americans moved with a patience that contradicted German assumptions about American impulsiveness. They used natural depressions in the ground, moved during wind gusts that masked sound, and advanced in a pattern that resembled how cowboys approached wild horses: oblique angles, pauses to observe, and intimate attention to how their movement might appear to watchful eyes. At 0612 hours, from a position 150 meters from the German line, far closer than von Steinberg thought possible, the American scouts opened fire with their M1 Garand rifles. The 8-round clips allowed rapid, accurate fire that the Germans initially mistook for automatic weapons. But what truly shocked the Wehrmacht soldiers was the precision. Von Steinberg wrote, "The Americans fired with accuracy we associated only with our own designated marksmen. From concealed positions we could not locate, they struck our observation posts, communication trenches, and fighting positions with what seemed like intimate knowledge of our defensive layout." This was not suppressive fire, this was surgical. The reconnaissance patrol used a tactic that Sergeant Dale Weatherby had adapted from his ranching days, cutting out individual positions the way cowboys separated cattle from a herd. They would neutralize one position with precise fire, wait for German response, identify the supporting positions from muzzle flashes, then engage those with equal accuracy. Within 20 minutes, they had created a detailed map of the entire defensive network without calling for artillery or air support. The Germans attempted to flank the American positions using standard Wehrmacht infantry tactics, aggressive movement by fire teams under covering fire. But the cowboys anticipated this. Corporal Dutton had positioned his men exactly where fleeing elk would run when pressured, understanding that humans under stress often follow the same terrain logic as animals. Private First Class Robert Red Johnson, a former Montana hunting guide, had set up at a natural choke point, a slight depression in the ground where the terrain funneled movement. His report, filed March 16, noted, "Waited like I was watching a game trail. Sure enough, they came right through, just like a bull elk pushed from cover." Engagement lasted 45 seconds. The engagement near Remagen revealed capabilities that German military intelligence had never documented in their extensive studies of American forces. Within 72 hours, reports from multiple Wehrmacht units described similar encounters with American reconnaissance elements that operated unlike any force they had previously engaged. Hauptmann Klaus Richter, intelligence officer for the 276th Volksgrenadier Division, compiled these reports into an assessment dated March 19, 1945, now preserved in the National Archives. His analysis revealed growing alarm: American reconnaissance units demonstrate field craft abilities inconsistent with their industrial warfare doctrine. They move through terrain without mechanical support, navigate without visible instruments, and estimate ranges with precision suggesting specialized training we have not previously identified. What Richter couldn't understand was that these abilities weren't taught in any military manual, they were inherited from a frontier culture that had spent generations reading the land. The skills that seemed mysterious to German observers were simply cowboy fundamentals applied to military operations. Sergeant Dale Weatherby's patrol demonstrated this during an April 3 mission near Kassel. Tasked with locating German artillery positions, Weatherby used a technique he'd learned finding cattle water sources in drought conditions. He observed the landscape for subtle indicators, vehicle tracks too fresh to be from retreating forces, disturbed vegetation patterns inconsistent with natural growth, and most tellingly, slight variations in ground compression visible in early morning light. You learn to read sign when you've spent 20 years tracking strays through Texas brush country, Weatherby reported in his after-action statement. German half-track makes the same kind of track pattern as a feed truck on ranch roads, just deeper. Follow it back to source, you find what you're looking for. His patrol located 3 artillery positions within 4 hours without electronic detection equipment, using only visual observation and terrain analysis. Each position was marked on maps with such accuracy that subsequent aerial reconnaissance confirmed placements within 15 meters of Weatherby's estimates. The German defenders found this capability nearly supernatural. Lieutenant Otto Brenner, captured on April 5 near Mulhausen, provided testimony that revealed the psychological impact. We were trained to defend against American artillery, American tanks, American air power. We understood industrial warfare. But these men who moved through forests like ghosts, who shot with impossible accuracy from positions we could not detect, who seemed to anticipate our every tactical response, this was something outside our frame of reference. The Americans had another advantage that German forces never fully grasped: visual signaling systems developed from ranch work. Cowboys had spent decades communicating across vast distances using hand signals, whistles, and subtle movements that wouldn't spook livestock. Translated to military operations, these same techniques allowed American scouts to coordinate without radio traffic that German signals intelligence could intercept. Corporal James Dutton's patrol demonstrated this on April 8 during a deep reconnaissance mission. Operating 15 kilometers ahead of American lines, his 4-man team communicated entirely through hand signals and bird calls that Dutton had learned growing up in Montana wilderness. German radio intercept units, accustomed to tracking Allied communications, detected nothing. The patrol gathered intelligence on enemy positions, returned safely, and the Germans never knew they had been observed. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. April 12, 1945. Near the town of Erfurt, an incident occurred that would become legendary among both American and German forces, though for vastly different reasons. The 3rd Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron encountered a situation that required skills no military academy taught, but every ranch hand knew instinctively. A German supply convoy, attempting to resupply isolated units, had become trapped when the lead vehicle broke down on a narrow forest road. The Americans, observing from concealed positions, faced a tactical problem. Standard procedure called for either calling artillery or waiting for armor support. But Lieutenant Harold Kemper, a former rodeo competitor from Oklahoma, saw a different solution. Staff Sergeant Vincent O'Reilly, who had worked cattle drives from New Mexico to Kansas, later described what happened in his official report. Lieutenant Kemper asked if any of us had rope. 3 of us did. We'd been carrying lariats since basic training, though the Army never understood why. What happened next was pure ranch work applied to warfare. The American soldiers used their jeeps to approach the stalled convoy from multiple angles, exactly as cowboys would surround a herd. Then, in a maneuver that left the Germans utterly bewildered, O'Reilly and 2 other former ranch hands deployed their lasso ropes with devastating effectiveness. Gefreiter Hans Müller, captured during this engagement, provided testimony that reveals the German perspective: we expected grenades, machine gun fire, perhaps tank attack. Instead, ropes came flying through the air. Before we understood what was happening, our machine gun was yanked from its mount, our radio antenna was pulled down, and our truck commander was literally pulled from his vehicle by a loop around his torso. It was like being attacked by circus performers, except the precision was military, the results were combat effective. The Americans had adapted techniques used for decades in rodeo arenas and cattle pens. A well-thrown lasso could disable equipment, disarm soldiers, or create chaos in enemy formations without firing a shot. The psychological impact was profound. German soldiers trained in modern warfare conventions found themselves defeated by methods that seemed to belong to a different century. Within 8 minutes, the entire convoy was neutralized. 15 German soldiers were captured, 6 vehicles were disabled, and not a single shot had been fired. The Americans had achieved complete tactical surprise using tools and techniques that existed nowhere in Wehrmacht tactical manuals. Lieutenant Kemper's after-action report, dated April 13, noted with characteristic Western understatement, employed alternative capture techniques utilizing equipment of personal origin. Results exceeded expectations. Recommend consideration of rope-based tactics for future vehicle interdiction operations in constrained terrain. The incident was witnessed by elements of the 89th Infantry Division, whose soldiers spread the story through American ranks with amazement and amusement. But for German prisoners being processed through collection points, the tale took on different significance. They began to understand they were fighting an enemy whose capabilities extended far beyond what their intelligence services had documented. Oberst Wilhelm Strauss, a career officer captured 2 days later, summarized the growing realization in his interrogation statement: "We prepared to fight American industry, their factories, their production capacity, their material superiority. We studied their tanks, their aircraft, their logistics. But we never imagined we would face men who fought like characters from their Western films, except these were real soldiers with real skills we had no counter for." April 18, 1945. The Thuringian Forest Sector. An engagement occurred that would cement the cowboy soldiers' reputation and create what German prisoners would later call der Geistschütze, the ghost shooter phenomenon. Private First Class Luther Luke Callahan, a former professional hunter and ranch hand from Arizona, was assigned to overwatch duty for an infantry advance near Arnstadt. What transpired over the next 6 hours became the subject of official military investigation, not because of any wrongdoing, but because the results seemed to defy physical possibility. Callahan positioned himself in a church bell tower approximately 600 yards from German defensive positions. Using his M1 Garand rifle, the same weapon every American infantryman carried, he began engaging targets with accuracy that German observers initially attributed to multiple snipers operating in coordination. The German defensive commander, Hauptmann Ernst Vogel, recorded in his unit log, enemy marksmen engaging from extreme range. Estimate minimum 3 snipers based on engagement pattern. Request immediate counter-sniper operations. But there was only one shooter. Callahan had spent 15 years hunting mule deer and pronghorn antelope across Arizona's high desert, regularly taking game at distances exceeding 400 yards with open sights. The skills that fed his family during the Depression were now being applied with military precision. Technical Sergeant Raymond Foster, serving as spotter, documented each engagement. Callahan fired 73 rounds over 6 hours. He disabled 2 German machine gun positions by hitting the gunners. He struck 3 separate radio operators, disrupting enemy communications. He neutralized an observation post by sequential engagement of all 4 occupants. Most remarkably, he achieved this with a standard-issue M1 Garand at ranges where most soldiers couldn't identify targets, let alone engage them effectively. The M1 Garand's effective range was officially listed as 500 yards, with accuracy declining significantly beyond 300 yards for average soldiers. But Callahan wasn't an average soldier. He had learned range estimation by judging distances to game animals across canyon country where misjudgment meant going hungry. He understood bullet drop from years of adjusting for elevation in mountain hunting. He could read wind effect on projectiles from watching dust devils cross desert flats. German attempts to counterfire proved futile. Callahan's position was well chosen using principles he'd learned finding vantage points to spot cattle in rough country. He had multiple angles of observation, natural concealment, and what cowboys called the long view, the ability to see the whole landscape as a connected system rather than isolated features. Lieutenant Carl Schneider, captured when his position was finally overrun by American infantry, provided testimony that revealed the psychological toll. "We knew someone was shooting at us with impossible accuracy, but we could not locate the source. Men became afraid to move, afraid to expose themselves even momentarily. One soldier, a veteran of Stalingrad, told me he had never felt so helpless. At least Russian snipers eventually revealed their positions. This American was like a ghost who could see everything while remaining invisible. The engagement ended when American infantry advanced and secured the German positions. Callahan descended from his bell tower, cleaned his rifle, and reported simply, "Targets engaged as presented." No ammunition wasted. His Western upbringing had taught him that every bullet represented money spent, a mindset that translated to military efficiency. April 25, 1945. POW Processing Center, Halle and Dursala. The accumulation of encounters with American cowboy soldiers had created a crisis of understanding among German prisoners. Intelligence officers conducting routine interrogations began documenting a phenomenon that revealed the complete failure of German military intelligence regarding American capabilities. Major Friedrich Lehmann, Wehrmacht intelligence specialist recently captured near Leipzig, requested a formal interview with American intelligence officers. His statement, preserved in Army intelligence files, provides extraordinary insight into German perceptions. "We were told Americans were factory workers and shopkeepers playing at soldier. We were informed they relied entirely on material superiority because they lacked warrior spirit. Every assumption has proven catastrophically wrong." Lehmann had compiled reports from dozens of German units that had encountered the Western-trained American reconnaissance forces. His analysis, written in meticulous detail, revealed how thoroughly German high command had misunderstood their enemy. "These men we face possess skills that have no equivalent in European military tradition," Lehmann wrote. "They navigate without compasses across terrain we consider impassable. They estimate ranges by eye with accuracy exceeding our optical instruments. They move through forests making less noise than our own specialized Jaeger units. Most disturbing, they demonstrate tactical patience, the ability to wait, observe, and strike at the optimal moment, that contradicts everything we were taught about American impulsiveness." The interrogation center documented hundreds of similar testimonies. Feldwebel Anton Kruger, an Eastern Front veteran, stated, "I fought Russians for 3 years. I understood their tactics, their weapons, their mindset. But these American cowboys, they fight with methods I cannot comprehend. They use ropes as weapons. They whistle to communicate. They seem to predict our movements before we make them." Oberleutnant Werner Hoffmann provided the most detailed analysis. "The American industrial soldier we prepared for does exist. We see him in their armor formations, their artillery batteries, their air corps. But interspersed among these industrial warriors are men from what they call the West, a frontier region we understood only through distorted cinema propaganda. These men bring capabilities that combine primitive techniques with modern weapons, creating combinations we never anticipated." American intelligence officers initially dismissed these reports as exaggeration or excuse-making by defeated soldiers. But Captain Douglas McNeil, intelligence analyst for 3rd Army, recognized something significant. His report dated April 27 noted, "Repeated prisoner statements indicate German forces encountered American capabilities outside their operational framework. The specific skills described, advanced land navigation, extreme-range marksmanship, nonverbal communication systems, and unconventional tactical approaches, correlate precisely with backgrounds of Western recruited personnel and reconnaissance units." The revelation extended beyond tactical considerations to psychological impact. German soldiers, particularly those from urban and industrial regions, had no cultural reference point for understanding men whose skills derived from frontier life. The closest equivalent in German experience would have been Alpine Gebirgsjäger units, but even these specialized mountain troops operated within conventional military frameworks. General Major Kurt Dressler, the highest-ranking officer captured in the April operations, summarized the strategic implication: "We calculated for American industrial capacity. We prepared for their material advantages. We understood we would be outproduced and eventually overwhelmed. But we believed German tactical and operational expertise would exact such a cost that political will would falter." We never imagined they would field soldiers whose individual skills exceeded our own specialized units. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. April 28, 1945. 3rd Army Headquarters, Forward Command Post near Regensburg. The accumulated reports of cowboy soldier effectiveness prompted a systematic analysis that would influence American military doctrine for decades to come. Colonel Harrison Bentley, Chief of Staff for 12th Corps, convened a tactical assessment board to examine what he termed irregular effectiveness patterns in reconnaissance operations. The data was remarkable. Reconnaissance units with significant Western recruited personnel completed missions in 40% less time than conventional units performing identical tasks. Their casualty rates were 65% lower. Most significantly, their intelligence gathering accuracy exceeded standard reconnaissance units by substantial margins. These weren't anecdotal observations, they were statistical patterns documented across multiple divisions and corps-level operations. Lieutenant Colonel Raymond Hartwell, who had recognized these capabilities back in 1942, presented findings that validated his original assessments. Western recruited personnel demonstrate measurable advantages in 3 critical areas: terrain analysis and navigation, long-range target engagement, and non-technical communication systems. These skills, developed through civilian occupations, provide military advantages that formal training cannot replicate in standard timeframes. The Army began implementing what they called cowboy tactics across broader reconnaissance formations. Units without Western personnel received training modules developed from documenting how these soldiers operated. At a training facility established near Bamberg, instructors taught conventional soldiers the principles behind cowboy techniques, even if they couldn't fully replicate the skills. Staff Sergeant Vincent O'Reilly was pulled from combat operations to serve as an instructor. His April 30th training report noted, "Teaching city boys to read land like ranch hands red cattle is like teaching civilians to be soldiers, possible but requires completely rebuilding their perception. Showed them how to use sun angles for direction, how to terrain funnels movement, how to estimate range using known object sizes. Some get it. Most struggle with concepts they've never needed before." The German response, documented through captured orders and intercepted communications, revealed desperate attempts to counter these tactics. General Oberst Heinrich von Clausen, commanding Army Group South Remnants, issued Directive 47 on April 29. All units increase vigilance against American reconnaissance elements. Assume enemy can observe from greater distances than previously calculated. Expect enemy movement through terrain previously considered impassable. Prepare for engagement methods outside conventional tactical frameworks. But understanding the threat and countering it proved vastly different. German forces, weakened and demoralized, lacked resources to implement effective countermeasures. More fundamentally, they were attempting to counter skills honed over lifetimes with tactical adjustments developed in weeks. The psychological dimensions extended beyond battlefield effectiveness. American combat correspondents, recognizing compelling human interest stories, began featuring the cowboy soldiers in dispatches. Ernie Pyle, the renowned war correspondent, wrote on May 1, "I've watched these boys from Wyoming and Texas and Montana work. They bring something to this war that you can't teach in boot camp, an understanding of space and distance and patience that comes from growing up where the horizon is always 20 miles away and the nearest neighbor might be an hour's ride." These stories reached American newspapers and radio broadcasts, creating public awareness of the Western soldiers' contributions. The narratives resonated with American audiences, fitting perfectly into cultural mythologies about frontier spirit and Western self-reliance. What was tactical reality in Europe became cultural validation at home. The cowboy, that quintessential American archetype, had proven relevant even in modern industrial warfare. For German prisoners reading captured American newspapers in POW camps, these stories confirmed their battlefield experiences. Feldwebel Kruger, reading a Stars and Stripes article about cowboy soldiers, remarked to fellow prisoners, "So it's true. They really are cowboys. We thought perhaps we were going mad, that stress had made us imagine things. But no, Americans actually sent cowboys to fight us, and we had no answer for them. May 5, 1945. The war in Europe had entered its final days. German forces were collapsing across all fronts, yet isolated pockets continued fighting, either unaware of the impending surrender or determined to resist to the end. The Cowboys soldiers of the American reconnaissance units found themselves in these final engagements, their unique skills proving decisive even as victory became inevitable. Near the Austrian border, elements of the 2nd Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron encountered a German mountain infantry battalion attempting to retreat into alpine terrain. These Gebirgsjäger, elite mountain troops, believed the high country would provide sanctuary. They hadn't accounted for men who had spent their lives in the Rocky Mountains and Sierra Nevada. Private First Class Robert Red Johnson, the Montana hunting guide, led a patrol into terrain the Germans considered their exclusive domain. His May 6 report captured the encounter with characteristic Western brevity. Germans thought mountains would save them. Spent 20 years tracking elk through steeper country than this. Found their positions by noon, had them mapped by evening, conventional forces moved in at dawn. German mountain troops surrendered when they realized we owned the high ground, literally and tactically. The Gebirgsjäger commander, Hauptmann Joseph Stein, expressed shock during his capture interview. "We are mountain specialists, trained in alpine warfare since before the war. Yet these Americans moved through terrain we considered prohibitive for lowland troops. They anticipated our routes, occupied our planned positions before we arrived, and demonstrated mountain craft equal to or exceeding our own. When I learned they came from American mountain regions, I understood, we faced men for whom this terrain was home, not a tactical challenge." Simultaneously, near Pilsen in Czechoslovakia, another encounter demonstrated the enduring effectiveness of cowboy tactics. Sergeant Dale Weatherby's patrol discovered a German armored column attempting to reach American lines to surrender rather than fall to Soviet forces advancing from the east. The situation required quick assessment and nonviolent resolution, precisely the kind of nuanced judgment that ranch work had cultivated. Weatherby's after-action statement revealed his approach: "Saw immediately these Germans wanted to quit, not fight. Reminded me of handling spooked horses, show them the easy path, don't push them toward panic. Used hand signals to guide them into surrender position, no shots fired, everybody went home alive. Colonel asked how I knew they'd comply. Told him same way I know a horse will settle if you give it space and direction, you read body language, movement patterns, intention." The column of 17 vehicles and 243 German soldiers surrendered without incident, processed through American lines and protected from Soviet advance. Weatherby had applied principles of animal handling to human psychology, achieving a tactical success through understanding rather than force. These final engagements crystallized what the cowboy soldiers represented, not merely unusual skills, but a fundamentally different approach to warfare that combined technical proficiency with human understanding. They could track enemies through impossible terrain, shoot with uncanny accuracy, and read tactical situations with insights developed from years of working with animals and land. May 7, 1945. Germany surrendered unconditionally. The cowboy soldiers, who had seemed like anachronisms when they enlisted in 1942, had proven decisively modern. Their frontier skills, adapted to industrial warfare, had saved countless American lives and contributed significantly to reconnaissance operations that shaped the final campaigns. Lieutenant Colonel Hartwell, in his final command report dated May 8, wrote, "The Western recruits demonstrated that warfare, regardless of technological advancement, remains fundamentally human. Navigation requires understanding terrain. Marksmanship requires discipline and patience. Tactical success requires reading opponents and anticipating their decisions. These men brought skills developed for peaceful purposes and adapted them brilliantly to military necessity." The American West's contribution to victory extends far beyond industrial production. It provided warriors whose capabilities no military academy could replicate. The immediate post-war period brought cowboys and Germans together in unexpected ways. As occupation forces established control and POW camps processed hundreds of thousands of prisoners, the men who had faced each other in combat now interacted in peace. These encounters revealed the human dimensions behind the tactical story. At a POW processing facility near Munich in June 1945, Private First Class William Buck Thornton encountered Oberleutnant Friedrich von Steinberg, whose unit had been among the first to face cowboy tactics in March. The meeting, documented by Army historians conducting oral history interviews, provided remarkable insights. Von Steinberg, speaking through an interpreter, asked Thornton directly, "How did you learn to move through forests so silently?" Our Eastern Front veterans, who survived 3 years against Soviet forces, could not detect your approach. Thornton's response captured the essence of the cultural gap. "Wasn't anything special, sir. Just how you move when you're tracking game for food. Make noise, you go hungry. Rush the approach, the animal spooks." Same principles worked against your positions: patience, observation, reading the terrain for what it tells you. The German officer absorbed this, then replied, "We prepared to fight American industry and technology. We never imagined we would face American wilderness." The exchange, witnessed by several soldiers from both sides, became emblematic of the broader revelation: Germany had studied American factories and underestimated American frontiers. Post-war military analysis, conducted by both American and German military historians, documented the strategic impact. The U.S. Army's official history, published in 1948, concluded, Western recruited reconnaissance personnel provided capabilities that significantly enhanced tactical intelligence gathering during the final campaigns. Their contribution, while not decisive to overall victory, shortened operations and reduced casualties through superior fieldcraft and marksmanship. German military assessments, produced by former Wehrmacht officers assisting American historians, were more emphatic. General Major Kurt Dressler, in his 1947 memoir, wrote, "Among the many miscalculations that led to Germany's defeat, our failure to understand the diverse nature of American military manpower ranks significantly. We saw a homogeneous industrial force and missed the regional specializations that gave American units unexpected advantages. The Cowboys were merely the most visible example of capabilities we failed to anticipate." The legacy extended beyond historical analysis into practical military doctrine. The U.S. Army incorporated lessons from cowboy soldier effectiveness into reconnaissance training programs. The cavalry school at Fort Riley developed curricula that taught principles these Western soldiers had applied instinctively: terrain analysis without instruments, range estimation by observation, silent movement techniques, and nonverbal communication systems. By the 1950s, these methods had become standard doctrine. Army field manuals included sections on natural navigation and primitive fieldcraft that directly descended from techniques cowboys had brought to warfare. The Korean War saw these principles applied again, particularly in mountain and forest operations where Korean terrain resembled Western American landscapes. The personal reconciliation between former enemies took decades. In 1985, a reunion in Montana brought together American cowboy veterans and German soldiers who had faced them. The gathering, organized by veteran associations from both nations, allowed elderly men to discuss experiences that had shaped their lives. Sergeant Dale Weatherby, speaking at the reunion, reflected, "We were young men doing what our countries asked of us. I brought skills learned from my father and grandfather, working cattle on Texas ranges. Those skills helped me survive and helped end the war faster. No pride in killing, but honest satisfaction in using what I knew to protect my fellow soldiers." Friedrich von Steinberg, attending the same reunion, offered German perspective. "We learned that we faced not just American power, but American diversity, different regions, different skills, different approaches, all unified toward victory. The Cowboys taught us that modern warfare still depends on timeless human capabilities: observation, patience, accuracy, and understanding the ground you fight on." These lessons transcended our conflict and became mutual respect. The story of German POWs confronting American cowboys represents more than tactical history. It illustrates how cultural heritage shapes military capability, how assumptions about enemies lead to strategic failures, and how skills developed for peaceful purposes can prove decisive in war. The cowboys who seemed like anachronisms in 1942 became exemplars of adaptive warfare by 1945, proving that in combat, diverse capabilities matter as much as standardized doctrine. Today, military historians recognize the cowboy soldiers as representing a unique moment when America's frontier heritage directly influenced industrial age warfare. Museums in the American West feature exhibits honoring these men. German military historians include their story and analyses of intelligence failures and the importance of understanding enemy capabilities comprehensively. The 8-year-old boy who watches his grandfather, a former cowboy soldier, receive honors at a veterans ceremony in Wyoming, 1995, carries forward this legacy. The skills that won recognition in European forests began on Western ranges, passed from generation to generation, briefly applied to warfare, then returned to peaceful purposes. The rope that captured German soldiers hangs in a museum. The marksmanship that amazed enemies came from hunting to feed families. The navigation that baffled Wehrmacht intelligence derived from finding cattle in vast landscapes. The German POWs who couldn't believe their eyes when they saw American cowboys had witnessed something genuinely unprecedented, the direct application of frontier skills to modern combat, executed by men who brought to warfare the same competence they brought to peacetime work. Their disbelief was reasonable, their defeat was inevitable once those skills were deployed against them. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.